A reading from Lamentations chapter 2. How long the Lord has covered the daughter Zion with the cloud of his anger. He has hurled down the splendour of Israel from heaven to earth. He has not remembered his footstool in the day of his anger. Without pity the Lord has swallowed up all the dwellings of Jacob. In his wrath he has torn down the strongholds of the daughter of Judah. He has brought her kingdom and its princes down to the ground in dishonour. In fierce anger he has cut off every horn of Israel. He has withdrawn his right hand at the approach of the enemy. He has burned in Jacob like a flaming fire that consumes everything around it. Like an enemy he has strung his bow. His right hand is ready. Like a foe he has slain all who were pleasing to the eye. He has poured out his wrath like fire on the tent of the daughter of Zion. The Lord is like an enemy. He has swallowed up Israel. He has swallowed up all her palaces and destroyed her strongholds. He has multiplied mourning and lamentation for the daughter of Judah. He has laid waste his dwelling like a garden. He has destroyed his place of meeting. The Lord has made Zion forget her appointed feasts and her Sabbaths. In his fierce anger he has spurned both king and priest. The Lord has rejected his altar and abandoned his sanctuary. He has handed over to the enemy the walls of her palaces. They have raised a shout in the house of the Lord as on the day of an appointed feast. The Lord determined to tear down the wall around the daughter of Zion. He stretched out a measuring line and did not withhold his hand from destroying. He made ramparts and walls lament. Together they wasted away. Her gates have sunk into the ground. Their bars he has broken and destroyed. Her king and her princes are exiled among the nations. The law is no more, and her prophets no longer find visions from the Lord. The elders of the daughter of Zion sit on the ground in silence. They have sprinkled dust on their heads and put on sackcloth. The young women of Jerusalem have bowed their heads to the ground. My eyes fail from weeping. I am in torment within. My heart is poured out on the ground because my people are destroyed, because children and infants faint in the streets of the city. They say to their mothers, "Where is bread and wine?" as they faint like wounded men in the streets of the city, as their lives ebb away in their mothers' arms. What can I say for you? With what can I compare you, O daughter of Jerusalem? To what can I liken you that I may comfort you, O virgin daughter of Zion? Your wound is as deep as the sea. Who can heal you? The visions of your prophets were false and worthless. They did not expose your sin to ward off your captivity. The oracles they gave you were false and misleading. All who pass your way clap their hands at you. They scoff and shake their heads at the daughter of Jerusalem. Is this the city that was called the perfection of beauty, the joy of the whole earth? All your enemies open their mouths wide against you. They scoff and gnash their teeth and say, "We have swallowed her up. This is the day we have waited for. We have lived to see it." The Lord has done what he planned. He has fulfilled his word which he decreed long ago. He has overthrown you without pity. He has let the enemy gloat over you. He has exalted the horn of your foes. The hearts of the people cry out to the Lord, "O wall of the daughter of Zion, let your tears flow like a river day and night. Give yourself no relief, your eyes no rest." Arise, cry out in the night as the watches of the night begin. Pour out your heart like water in the presence of the Lord. Lift up your hands to him for the lives of your children who faint from hunger at the head of every street. Look, O Lord, and consider, whom have you ever treated like this? Should women eat their offspring, the children they've cared for? Should priest and prophet be killed in the sanctuary of the Lord? Young and old lie together in the dust of the streets. My young men and maidens have fallen by the sword. You have slain them in the day of your anger. You have slaughtered them without pity. As you summoned to a feast day, so you summoned against me terrors on every side. In the days of the Lord's anger, no one escaped or survived. Those I cared for and reared, my enemy has destroyed. We wonder, where is God in Lamentations? Is he silent? Is he ignoring Lady Zion's pleas? Now, remember the word palindrome. That's the idea that verses match each other, not necessarily in language, but in the idea that they convey. So verse 1 and verse 22 will have a similar idea, and verse 2 and verse 21. Verse 3 and verse 20. So that the big idea, the key point, comes in the middle of the reading, and that's different to our usual way of thinking in the West. So verses 1 and 22 have a common theme, day of his anger. Verse 2 and verse 21, common theme, have no pity. Verse 3 and verse 20, dreadful devouring. And so we get an idea of the overall theme of the lament, God's anger. But remember what I said in chapter 1, the hinge comes in the middle, the key, the big idea of the passage. And so we see verse 11, bile poured out, fainting on the streets. Verse 12, fainting in the streets, life poured out. Same theme. Life being poured out. Fainting in the streets. The consequence of God's anger. So the big idea of chapter 2 of Lamentations are the consequences of God's anger. Now in the first half of the reading, verses 1 to 11, Jeremiah is describing objectively what he sees. Then in the second half of the reading, verse 12 onwards, he's identifying with Lady Zion and he's adding his feelings to what he's seen, and then calling on Lady Zion to plead with God right at the end of the reading. Now, if you were listening to me reading the passage, you'll have noticed that the word Lord pops up quite a few times, 14 in fact. And if you've got the text in front of you, if you've got the Bible passage in front of you, you'll have seen that in the first half of the reading, the majority of the word Lord are in lowercase, if you're using an English Town translation. And in the second half of the reading, the word Lord is larger case, uppercase. And you may be wondering, why is there a difference? Well, that difference highlights why Jerusalem and the people are suffering and gives grounds for the appeal to God that's going to come at the end of the reading. So in the first half of the reading, the word Lord, lowercase, is in Hebrew Adonai. And that would be better translated in English as the Master, or the Sovereign Lord of all the nations. That's how the other nations relate to God, as Lord Adonai, Master. And that's how, in the opening half of the reading, God comes to Jerusalem as Lord, lowercase, Adonai, Master, Sovereign Lord of the nations. Then in the second half of the reading, the word Lord, uppercase, is in Hebrew Yahweh. And that's the name given to God as part of the covenantal relationship. So, do you see the difference between the two words Lord? Verses 1 to 11, the first half, same name as all the other nations use, no relationship. Second half of the reading, Lord, uppercase, Yahweh, covenantal relationship. God made promises to the people of Israel through Abraham. We see them through the Old Testament. And in response, the people of Israel are to trust those promises and obey God's law and prophets. So why the change? Why in the first half, Lord, lowercase, second half, uppercase? Well, remember, Jerusalem was the capital city of the Israelites. God had called Israel to be his special people. He'd made that promise, that covenant with Abraham. He'd rescued them from slavery, the Exodus. He'd made a covenant with them that told them his promises to them and what his obligations to them were. Remember Deuteronomy. And as part of that, his name was to be Yahweh to them. They'd been given Moses and Joshua to lead them, then the judges and the kings to rule them, along with the priests to administer sacrifices for forgiveness and restoration. Remember Deuteronomy. And then the prophets to tell them what God was saying to them. Remember people like Amos and Hosea. They'd been given a land flowing with milk and honey, then a city with the temple at its heart. And if we remember Deuteronomy, that was to be the place for God's name. That was going to be the place where God would dwell. And so great, call God Yahweh then, because you have this relationship with him. This is all that he's done for you. But why isn't that covenantal relationship name used in the first half of the reading? Well, that's where the big idea of the reading comes in, those hinge verses. It's because of his anger. So why is God angry? Why do they use the same name for God as all the other nations have to? Well, if we think back through our Old Testament, we see the judges didn't live up to their calling. Many of the kings led the country astray. Remember, 1 Kings, 2 Kings. The priests were corrupt, the prophets false. So time and time again, as we read in Kings, the people of Israel didn't keep their side of the bargain, while expecting the Lord, Yahweh, to keep his. So time and time again, remember Amos and Hosea, he warns them against this, but they ignored his warnings. Now, as we heard in chapter 1, they're having to learn that their disobedience has consequences. And those consequences are what God had said they would be. Again, remember Amos and Hosea. There's no more privilege. Israel must face God's anger and judgment on the same level as their wicked and godless neighbours. Again, remember Deuteronomy. He's even prepared to destroy the temple and the throne, verses 5 and 6. The very things that symbolised his presence with them and amongst them. So if you like, what we're hearing in the first half of the chapter is, because of their disobedience, the relationship is over. Now we too are warned of God's judgment and anger. We're warned throughout the Bible of an existence beyond death, where we're cut off from relationship with God. We call it hell. And it's not going to be like the fiery pictures that Victorian artists may present. But it's going to be like the picture that Jeremiah here is presenting of Jerusalem. All we once held dear will be destroyed. An eternity living amongst the ruins. The lesson is, God has said that he will do this. He said it to Jerusalem, and he did it. The same warning applies to us. God has said there will be hell for those who don't turn back to him, and he will do it. Even to those who were once his precious children. Will we hear the warning? Then the second half of the passage, the switch to Yahweh, is the plea to the relationship. The writer Jeremiah now, he's no longer an observer writing dispassionately. He comes alongside Lady Zion. Now remember, in chapter 1, Lady Zion has appealed to passers-by, but none had helped her. Now Jeremiah comes alongside, and we read in verse 13, he acts as an advocate for Zion. He recognises that the pain is beyond comprehension, and he asks the rhetorical question, verse 13, who can heal her? First of all, can the prophets, verse 14, heal her? No. So if you like, the religious establishment can't. Can the neighbours heal her? Verse 15. No. Can enemies heal her? Verse 16. No. Now, we read in verses 9 and 10 that the political and religious establishment has been destroyed. Remember Amos chapter 8 verse 1. So who can heal from the destruction caused by God's anger? Now again, today we may look to our politicians for help or our religious leaders, but look at the mess they're making of the current crisis. So where will we turn in our despair? Well, perhaps we might look to sociologists or educationalists. Let's have a better, wider education. That will improve our lot. Where will we turn to in our despair? Psychologists, life coaches? Well, the rise in mental health issues today wouldn't seem to support that. So where will we turn to in our despair? Well, the answer comes in the seemingly missing voice. Verse 13 is very similar to Jeremiah chapter 13, verses 12 to 17. And that reading in Jeremiah continues that it is Yahweh who brings the healing. The one with whom we have the relationship brings the healing. Verse 15 here is adapted from Psalm 48. So who can heal you? Remember the words of the great hymn, Abide with me. Abide with me, fast falls the eventide. The darkness deepens, Lord, with me abide. When other helpers fail and comforts flee, help of the helpless, oh, abide with me. So where will we turn to in our despair? Can Yahweh? Can God? When we're in the pits of despair, when we cry out to him in anger, in grief, in desolation, can God heal us? Well, Jeremiah says to Lady Zion, try it and see, because, let's be honest, there's nowhere else to go. Until you get the last few verses of the reading, and we read Lady Zion's plea. But do you notice she doesn't ask for mercy or pardon or restoration. She wants God to look and consider. She asks questions of God. She challenges God to explain himself. Who else have you treated like this? It's unfair. Have you forgotten who we are? Have you forgotten our relationship? Haven't you gone too far, God? Surely you made human life sacred. Why are you destroying it? Haven't you gone too far, God, in destroying what you brought to glory? In short, God, haven't you broken your own rules? God, you're the wrongdoer. And there's no answer. She blames God for the situation. She throws the suffering at God's feet. How can I pray to a God who's done this to my people? But what else can she do? Now, if Lady Zion can ask God those difficult questions, then surely so can we. Surely it's okay to ask God those questions that, well, they seem kind of rude, don't they? But even Jesus did it, didn't he? In the Garden of Gethsemane. In the midst of our suffering, our desolation, throw at God on behalf of his people our anger. Ask him those difficult questions. Scream at him. Look, consider what you've done. It's fine. It's okay to do that. So, who is God to you? Adonai? Master? Your relationship is really no different to the world around, and you're prepared to be treated in the same way. Or is God Yahweh? You can call on him based on your relationship with him. A relationship that said, yes, I've messed up. Yes, I need your saving power, God, shown through the Lord Jesus. Yes, I want a personal relationship with you because of Jesus. Yes, I want you as Lord of my life. Because, let's be frank, where else can you go? Who else is going to listen to you? The politicians, the religious leaders, your friends, your enemies, your neighbours? No. The only person who will listen is Yahweh, the one who promises to bless, to lead to a land of milk and honey, if only we'll follow him and obey him. Abide with me, fast falls the eventide. The darkness deepens, Lord, with me abide. When other helpers fail and comforts flee, help of the helpless, oh, abide with me. I pray you would know the Almighty, eternal God as Yahweh and have a personal relationship with him, knowing that when other helpers fail, he will abide with you